Talk about stressful, and I mean, this could qualify in that. It is technically early, but after this past week of games, it's a little bit worrying. We'll go straight into our Kraken section here, but before we get into the past week of games, my buddy Everett Fitzhugh, the Seattle Kraken radio voice, was able to stop by with me before the home opener, which we'll talk about first when we get through this, about this team, about a certain player. So the upcoming prospects and more. So we'll go to that right now.
Here at Climate Pledge Arena with my good buddy, the voice of Seattle Kraken, Everett Fitzhugh. Everett, you're not worried about this team despite going winless on the opening road trip.
Yeah.
Why is that, and what positive signs do you see early on with this team?
I mean, a multitude of reasons. I think for me, number one, the goaltending has been solid. You know, this team has not allowed a ton of goals in the opening road trip. And I think when you can get solid performances from both your starter and your backup goaltender, I think it bodes well. Also, you're playing in 3 consecutive home openers. Vegas, they raise a banner. Nashville barely missed the playoffs. They're fired up. And then St. Louis, again, they were coming off of a heartbreaking shootout loss in Dallas, so now they're coming back home. So you're in a bunch of really hostile environments. So I think for me, I'm not worried. This team is still intact from last season. You bring back that core, Matty Beniers, Jordan Eberle, Jared McCann, Andre Burakovsky is back on defense, Adam Larson, Vince Dunn with a big contract. There are so many positives, I think, surrounding this team. And, you know, we remember the NFL when they had 4 preseason games, right? And you play your 3rd game, that's when all your starters get in the game. Well, in hockey, it's only that way for your final preseason game. So for the Kraken, they had one opportunity to get that chemistry together, to build that cohesion. And we saw evidence of the lack of that in the opening road trip. But now I think they're getting back on their footing. You're starting to see this team where they were last year and the habits that they formed last season. You're starting to see those come in right now.
Talking about some of the newer guys, you mentioned these guys kind of get that last game. It's not a lot of time to necessarily generate a ton of chemistry. We've got our first state of Washington-born native and Kyler Yamamoto. What have you seen from him? What should people know about the former Oiler?
An endless motor. I mean, this guy knows how to skate. He's very skilled. Don't let the size fool you, right? He is a player that can do a lot of good things with the puck. And I think for him to be out of Edmonton, to come here to Seattle, anytime you're playing with the likes of a Connor McDavid, a Leon Draisaitl, an Evander Kane, these world-class players that we've been seeing in the NHL, you know, that's a lot of pressure to be on that top line. But now you're finding him in more of that bottom 6 role, which is not a bad thing. You know, you can tell that he's thriving in that role. He's comfortable in that role. And you're already seeing the way that he carries himself on the ice suits his game. So he's fitting in well to this locker room. And I think for him, I mean, Kyler Yamamoto, I think, is going to end up being a really good piece to replace a lot of that depth that was lost last season.
And then kind of changing, I guess, everyone's favorite deep pair.
Yeah.
Adam Larson, Vince Dunn.
The law firm, Dunn Larson.
I mean, they've been so important to this team the last 2 years. I know in year 1 they kind of formed at the end. How important is that to have kind of one specific group, that you need those guys out there all the time, and what they both bring? Because they've talked about at length how important they are to each other and that bond that they have.
Well, and I think it's special too, because not only are they close on the ice, they're close off the ice. Their stalls are together in the locker room. They sit next to each other on the bus. They're eating meals together. They hang out here in Seattle, going to movies and grabbing dinner, stuff like that. So not only are they teammates, but they've become friends. They developed this really good relationship. And I think for a guy like Vince Dunn, who was always known for his offensive capabilities, Adam Larson has brought out the defensive side in Vince Dunn. And I think we've really seen a more mature game out of him. Adam Larson, starting off at Edmonton, he went to the Devils. He's been, or he started out with the Devils rather, then went to Edmonton. You know, he's been in the Stanley Cup final before with the Devils in his first NHL season. So he knows what it takes to get there. Vince Dunn, winning a Stanley Cup with the St. Louis Blues, along with James Schwartz as well, a couple of years ago. So these are players that know what it takes to get to that level, what it takes to get it done. But I think for Vince Dunn and for Adam Larson, this is a pair that can be top 15 teams in the league, or you know, it can be one of those top defensive pairs in the NHL. So I think for those two, it's all about continuing to do what has made them successful so far.
Obviously, the prospect pool for this team is small compared to the rest of the league.
Yep.
but there's a lot of talent in Coachella
yeah.
Valley and in the draft picks that they've made. What can you say about what you've seen? Because obviously we had Dev Camp
Yeah.
here, we had rookie camp, and that Coachella Valley team, they lost their home opener, but they
Yeah.
should be a really fun team to watch throughout the course of the year, and a lot of those guys could be ready to come up here
Yeah.
at a moment's notice.
Well, and that's the thing, too. That is what Ron Francis was trying so hard to do when you're building this team. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you need to develop from the minor league system. Unlike the NBA, unlike football, you have that pipeline. You have to develop from the ground up, from your minor league system up. Think Seattle Mariners, right? We're seeing some of these Mariners players coming out of Tacoma, coming out of Double-A baseball over the past few years because of that development. Well, we're getting that here in Seattle as well. Coachella last year, in their first year, they make it all the way to the final game of the Calder Cup championship, double overtime, and they lose to her. I know, they lose to Hershey, but so close. But you've got the reigning AHL Rookie of the Year, Ty Karche, who's now up here. But you've got so many players down there that are capable that can fill in at the NHL level, but that can also perform well and admirably at the American League level as well.
And then just to wrap up, I've been here in Seattle for 3 years now. From your experience, what can you say about this city's fan base and how much they've accepted this team and grown to love it?
Oh, the fan base here is awesome. I tell the story all the time. I grew up in Detroit, late 90s. The Red Wings were winning back-to-back Stanley Cups. In my lifetime growing up, the Red Wings made 26 consecutive trips to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Playoff hockey was expected where I come from. 3 years here in Seattle, I'm seeing that same passion from our fan base. I'm feeling that same energy that I felt in June of 97 and 98 when the Red Wings were playing Philadelphia and Washington for the Cup. And I think that's something to be said about the passionate fans we have here in Seattle, about the sports culture that we have here in Seattle. This town is becoming a hockey town. And I think that playoff run last season really helped establish Seattle as a hockey town, as an NHL market, and it's only going to get bigger. So our fans have been great. I've loved the support. It's been awesome to see, and I want to see more decals and jerseys and hats and sweatshirts all around town. And this already is getting a reputation around the league of having some of the best fans and being one of the best markets we have in the NHL.
That'll do it from Chuck and Everett here at Climate Pledge Arena, and I'll even do a finger guns from my butt Everett.
So that was fun to do. Always good to see Everett. Always good to chat. Obviously, if you remember, goodness, last year it was, Everett and I did our interview here in the Black Media Matter studio right over at the wall over there. So anyway, we'll get into it with the Kraken segment. Just talked about it there with the home opener. The home opener did not lead to a happy result. It wasn't Seattle's first win of the season. The Kraken fall to the Colorado Avalanche by a score of 1-4. Our player of the game, forward Kyler Yamamoto, 1 goal, 2 shots, and 1 block. Celebrating that goal, as you can see here in this photo by Matthew Bermudez. He becomes the first Washington-born player to score for the Kraken, just in a loss, unfortunately. Yamamoto scores in the first period, and the Avalanche go on to score the next 4 goals. Seattle unable to answer. Those offensive struggles continue. The power play continues to struggle, just hard. On much of the same, a lot of from the first few games there, a nice, strong first period, and then everything kind of deteriorates throughout the way. That wasn't the case in game 2 of this homestand, 3-game homestand, as the Kraken were able to pull away from the Carolina Hurricanes. Now you see the score of 7-4. You say pull away. Yes. Seattle was able to build a 4-goal lead. A 4-1 lead, I apologize, chasing starting goaltender Antti Ranta out of this game after Vince Dunn's power play goal. But backup goaltender, the young Pyotr Kochetkov, was able to keep the Carolina Hurricanes in this game. They were able to bring it really close and tight. It was a 1-goal difference late before Seattle added 3 goals in the third period and was able to pull away and ensure that they would get their first win of the season. One of those goals here scored by forward Jared McCann on Kochetkov, taken our photo of the game here by Liz Wolter. Our player of the game, defenseman Vince Dunn, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points, a 3+-, 4 shots, 1 block, and 1 takeaway in this big win against the Hurricanes, who for most of this offseason, and while it's still early, that might have gone down. I've been a Stanley Cup favorite, a team that many think can go all the way this year. Very talented roster. They were banged up going into this game, but Seattle has been arguably as well. The third and final game of the homestand, you think, okay, maybe they're going to be able to take that big win against the Hurricanes and make it, something that they can build off of. That wasn't the case. Seattle would lose on October 21st versus the New York Rangers, 1-4. Same score as the game against the Avalanche and same sort of result as that game against Colorado in the home opener. Just a really tough one in this one. It's very bizarre. In the pregame video that the team does, 2 lights in the southwest section of the stadium stayed on when they were supposed to stay off. And then when the game was about to start, those lights turned off and never turned back on. As a result, one end of the rink was darker than the other. The south side of the rink, which is a little odd to see, it was noticeably darker. Both teams decided to play through it. There were reportedly serious discussions of that game being postponed, but they consulted both goalies and decided to go through with it. Through all 3 of those intermissions, at the halfway mark, the team switched so that there was no unfair advantage in this one. And it seemed like things were going to go good. As you can see in this photo of the game by Sage Sepetto, the first goal of the night was scored by our player of the game, defenseman Justin Schultz. 1 goal, 1 point, 1 shot in the first period. After that, it was all Rangers. Seattle they got beat physically. They weren't able to do anything in their defensive zone. They weren't able to get the puck out. Really, it was sloppy. They had turnovers, the offensive side of things. They didn't generate much, and when they did, Jonathan Quick was more than willing, more than able to shut it down. So a really frustrating past week in regards to the 2 losses that this team took. Obviously, that win against Carolina was big, but these 2 losses really frustrating. We go over to our player of the week. I went with Vince Dunn, just considering the points that he's been racking up over the past 3 games. As you can see, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points, and a 2+ in that photo by Liz Wolter. Early on, I haven't panicked. I thought that they weren't that far off. Even after that Colorado game, I still thought they weren't that far off. The penalty kill looked good. The goaltending was there, despite what some fans who might not watch the whole game will say to you. Defensively, they had a couple lapses, but outside of that, they were good at denying entry, denying chances. It was just kind of offensively on the power play that they struggled. It looked like Seattle had kind of punched through and was able to get things going after that big win against the Hurricanes. And then you fall back to earth and a little bit lower than that in that loss to the Rangers. The defensive lapses, missing assignments, leaving guys wide open, leaving your goaltenders out to dry, simply just can't continue to happen. Because if that happens, it's eventually going to snowball to where the other performances from your different aspects of your game are going to worsen. The first period looked good for Seattle. They were getting shots on the net, especially considering the way that things were dark. You should have just kind of been flinging things on net at quick, and they weren't really doing that. They were almost too selective with their shots. The power play 0 for 3 that night after going 2 for 4 the night before. 2 nights before. You also got really bullied on the physical side of things, and it resulted in one of your players getting injured. So we'll go to that after we get another piece of team news out of the way. Obviously, we already talked about Brandon Tanev being injured. On the 20th, the team officially placed him on injured reserve. It does open up a roster spot for another call-up from Coachella Valley if the team chooses to do so. What will probably lead to them making a call-up is this next piece of news, though. In that loss to the Rangers, defenseman and captain of the Rangers, Jacob Trouba, boarded Andrei Burakovsky, and Burakovsky suffered an upper body injury, keeping him out of action for 6 to 8 weeks. He did have successful surgery, as announced by the team. They wouldn't say what it was, as is the case with hockey. If you're new here, hockey doesn't ever really tell you what it is that's injured until maybe the off season. So it's either upper body or lower body. If we're talking upper body, it could be your head. You could have a concussion. It could also be you have a torn pectoral muscle. You could also have your finger chopped off. If it's lower body, your foot could be broken. It could also be a hamstring strain. So that's how it is with hockey. If you're new, we'll catch you up there. Yeah, this is a big loss. You're already without Brandon Tanev, someone who is a big aspect of that fourth line, the penalty kill, and the activity of this team, kind of the heartbeat in some ways. You lose Andre Burakovsky, who missed most of last year, missed that playoff run. If they have him for that playoff run, they're probably going deeper into the playoffs. And now you lose him early on in the season after you've only won one of your first 6 games. So the hits continue to roll for Seattle. As a corresponding move to that Brandon Tanev injury, they did call up a day before they placed him on injury reserve. They called up forward Devin Shore from AHL Coachella Valley. He has not gotten any game action. He has been in practices. He has been in those warm-up skates. He has not, though, gotten any game action. So I'd say it's almost time to panic. It is almost time to panic. And the road trip that you're going to go on next isn't going to be an easy one. You're going to play a Detroit team that's been pretty solid early on. And then you go into the Florida Gauntlet with the Hurricanes, who are probably not happy with the fact that you hung 7 goals on them. You're going to go play them in their place. You're going to play the team that was the Stanley Cup runner-up in the Florida Panthers, and then the Tampa Bay Lightning, who just a few years ago won their second Stanley Cup. Second Stanley Cup in a matter of a few years. So it's a big test. It's going to be a really big test for this team. But again, they had done a bunch right early on. It's not too far-fetched to think that they do the same right things and tweak aspects of their game, but we'll see. So speaking of those next few games, starts tomorrow, October 24th at the Detroit Red Wings, a 5:15 puck drop. Yes, 5:15 at Detroit. Detroit coming off of, a really nice start to the season. They'll play a Seattle team that is really in need of a bounce back, really in need of a way to get things back on track. Then after that Detroit game, 2 days later, on the road, October 26th at the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a 4 p.m. Pacific time puck drop against a Carolina team, again, that is really looking to set things right after this 7-4 game that Seattle won. To close out this upcoming week, October 28th at the Florida Panthers is a 3 p.m. Pacific time puck drop. I'm realizing that I said Carolina and Florida. It's not the same. I apologize. October 28th at the Panthers is a 3 p.m. puck drop. And again, that's a team that's coming off of being the runners-up for the Stanley Cup this past season. So none of those games should be easy, and especially considering the way that Seattle has made these games that they've played already harder on themselves. So